you have on your homework that's due, I think, tonight? Yeah. Okay, so this says complete the timing diagram for the circuit below with the positive edge trigger D flip-flops. Assume Q1 and Q0 are both initially 0. So I have, I actually drew this first on a nice program that drew like the actual design and had the D flip-flops and everything, and then my computer crashed and I lost it, and it's like, okay, I'm just drawing it. Okay, so here we have a signal Z that's going into flip-flop 1, and the output of flip-flop 1, Q1, is the input for flip-flop 0. And going into the clock input for both of them is the clock. I like it when the clock is the clock input. It's not always, which makes things tricky. Okay, so let's remember. Okay, so we have okay, so that is our circuit right there. So these are positive edge triggered. So like what I've done before, I'm going to draw some vertical lines down the positive edges so that I know where to change. Okay, so let's start with Q1, because Q1 is the easiest one. It's just a D flip-flop with this input Z, and I have the Z right here. So it's just like the problems that we were doing just a minute ago. So Q1, we're saying it starts at 0. It gets to the positive edge. It's a D flip-flop, so it's going to look at what the input is, and the input is 0. So it will be 0. It gets to the next positive edge. It looks at the input. The input is still 0, so it'll be 0. It gets to the next positive edge, and the input is 1, so it becomes 1. And at the next positive edge, the input is 0, so it becomes 0. Okay, so now Q0 is a little bit different, because the input for Q0 is Q1. And so everything is happening a clock cycle later on Q0 than on Q1. So the input for, if I'm looking at the edge of the clock, the input is going to be what Q1 was the clock cycle before. Because the clock cycle before is going to be what's sitting right here, ready to go in. So we made a change, and we got a new Q1. This Q1 is now sitting here ready to be the input as soon as the clock changes. So this is the Q1 from the time before. So when we look at Q0, when we get to this first positive edge, it's going to look at what Q1 was the time before, and it was 0, so it'll be 0. Now when I get to this edge, it's going to follow what Q1 was here. It's going to go back 1 and look, and it was still 0. Now when it gets here, it's going to go back 1 and look here, and at this point it changed to 1, so it's going to become 1. Questions on that one? All right. And go on to number 5. Okay, so okay, so again, let's start with, I think this one is ordering them with 0, 1, 2, 3 in this direction. Dr. Tahan likes to order them in the other direction. And there's reasons why people do it in one direction or the other. But so we're going to start with Q0, which is right here. And it's going to be the easiest one because it only depends on Q bar from the time before. So it started at 0, which meant that Q bar was 1. So it's going to become, oh, let me do my positive edges. So Q started at 0, so Q bar was 1. That's what's going into the input, so it'll be 1. Now Q was 1, so that means Q bar is 0, so the next time it'll be 0. Well, now it's 0, so Q bar will be 1. That's our input, so it'll be 1. So it's just going to go back and forth like that. Okay, so now let's look at Q1. The input for Q1 is Q0. So to determine what Q1 is going to be, it is going to look back and see what Q0 was the clock cycle before. And the clock cycle before it was 0. And then we get to our next edge, and it'll look at what Q0 was the clock cycle before, which was 1. And then the next edge, it'll look what the clock cycle was before, which was 0. So it's going to end up being just exactly the opposite of Q0. Now, when we get to Q2, we get to the positive edge, it looks to see what Q1 was before, which was 0. And then what was Q1 before? It was 0. And now Q1 is 1. And then Q1 is 0. And then now it's going to do its alternating thing. But it has this delay up in front because it had to wait for the signal to get to it. And then we'll have an even longer delay for Q3. So Q3, we'll look at what Q2 was, that was 0. Look at what Q2 was, that was 0. Look at what Q2 was, that was 0. And then now it's 1, and then 0, and then 1, and then 0, and then 1, and then 0.
Can you explain the first one again with Q bar?
Yes. Okay. So when we start, Q is 0. Q bar is the complement of that, it's 1. So when we get to the clock edge and it's supposed to change, so this 1, that's the input up here. And so it's Q follows D. So when it gets to the clock edge, it looks at that and says, oh, that's 1. So I will become a 1. And when it becomes a 1, then Q bar becomes a 0. But now this 0 is on this line, and so now we have a 0 rating there for the next time around. Other questions?